My name is Irwin Krinsky, and I had the good fortune of studying with Boris Maximovich as my teacher for piano. Maximovich was a great artist in his own right, but he had the good fortune of studying and being a very good friend of one of the greatest pianists, in my opinion, that ever touched the instrument, namely Simon Barere.
Born September 1st, 1896, Simon Barere was the 11th in a Jewish family of 13 children. His prodigal piano playing led him to study with Felix Blumenfeld, alongside famed pianist Vladimir Horowitz, although Barere was Blumenfeld's preferred student. According to noted music critic Harold C. Schoenberg, Barere was more than a scorching virtuoso. He produced a colorful piano tone that could also be highly musical. The retiring career, marked by tribulations at every turn, Barere is still regarded as one of the greatest piano geniuses ever to live by those who are familiar with his work.
My father always liked music as a child, and his neighbor upstairs taught him how to read music and scales and so on. He was extremely talented. But would you believe that my father was working at the age of 8 and 9, playing in silent movie houses, selling policies on the street, and he showed tremendous talent. So he promised his mother that one day he would go to St. Petersburg and to a better conservatory in order to advance as a musician. But you know something, those days, during the Tsarist Russia, Jews were not allowed to live in big cities. This is something American people do not know that. The few Jews that were allowed in Moscow, St. Petersburg, had to have permits.
Alexander Glazunov, a Russian composer, music teacher, and conductor. He served as director of the St. Petersburg Conservatory between 1905 and 1928 and allowed for many Jewish musicians to get their start at that prestigious institute, not seeing people for their race or religion, but rather purely for their musical talent.
Glazunov was the dean of the conservatory, a big fat Russian man. And he warned my father, said not to go out and disappear because he was Jewish. You know, my father didn't pay attention to it at all. He got himself a job right away. If not for Glazunov, we would not have all the famous violinists. Zimbalist, Heifetz, Milstein. He was the dean of the conservatory. He helped these people. You know what's the most unusual thing about my father was that he did not practice. Before an artist or pianist or anybody goes out and plays in Carnegie Hall, he tries out his program in Ann Arbor, Michigan, Detroit, Michigan, and he goes anywhere. My father never did that. His first recital was always at Carnegie Hall, and he didn't practice for 3-4 weeks. He did not want to get stale. This is the way he used to call it. He was a very strange man. I mean, physically, it was a very unusual creature. He used to call me up around 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. He says, you know, Boris, I practiced 4 hours today. I said, what happened? He said, I can't play.
Unlike almost any concert pianist, Barere hardly ever practiced. In fact, all of his life, he never even owned his own piano.
I'll tell you another story. I was once swimming with him, like some lake or some ocean water. And you know how your hands get cold and they get stiff? He all of a sudden jumped out of the water in a panic because he never felt that. Can you imagine that? You know what it is to have cold hands? Yeah. He never felt that. There was something wrong with him. In Chicago, he had to play the Tchaikovsky concerto. He was staying with a family there who had a dog. And it was snowing. It was cold. You know, Chicago is miserable. You know, he wouldn't go to the hall until he walked the dog first. He walked the dog. You think he had gloves on? No. He just walked the dog and then went. I mean, the guy was wacko. My father left Russia first, and because of certain connections, we got permission to, my mother and I got permission to leave Russia also. We wound up in Latvia. After Latvia, you know, my father gave a debut in Berlin as a classical pianist. He created a sensation over there. But being Jewish, his whole tour was cancelled. They wouldn't let him play.
With tensions rising as the Nazi regime gained power, many assimilated Jews were shocked by what was happening. While some did not predict or were in denial about how bad it would get, those with foresight and connections planned their escape.
Luckily, we were Soviet citizens still. We were able to flee from Germany to Sweden. And this is where I grew up for 6-7 years. My father collapsed. He didn't know what to do. He quit playing. We were living on borrowed money and in the piano lessons that my mother used to give. Then one day, he was called by an English manager to come over there, and he went and he created a sensation in London, and he made the recordings for the British company. And then after that, the Baldwin pianos brought him over here to America.
Barere's London debut with Beecham took place at Aeolian Hall in 1934, and it was a great success.
As he played more and more at Carnegie Hall and other well-known venues, he began to build his career. Things were finally starting to look up as the struggling artist began to develop a reputation in the States.
So they sponsored him for a little while, you see, so that he could get up on his feet. And he played very many concerts the first years over here for a very small fee, but it got him a foothold here.
Maximovich had just arrived in this country in 1951, and he was in New York City, and he had been separated and had no contact with his teacher, Simon Barere, for perhaps 20 to 25 years. The world was very turbulent in those years, and when he found out that his teacher was in New York, he called him up immediately, and they had a wonderful conversation on the phone. And his teacher, Barere, told my teacher, Maximovich, that he was playing Carnegie Hall in a few days, and it would be great to see him, and he was very excited about reuniting with him.
My father said, listen, I'm playing in Carnegie Hall this second, you know. I'm going to ask my son to leave you and your wife 2 tickets, and we will see each other then.
Barere was doing rather well, finally, in his life and in this country. And he had very good management, and he wanted to introduce Maximovich to his manager and see if he could be help in setting Maximovich up in this country.
Maximovich arrived there. He went into the loge.
My teacher picked up his tickets at the box office, saw his friend and teacher walk out on stage in Carnegie Hall in front of a packed house with Eugene Ormandy and the Philadelphia Strings, and they launched into the Grieg Piano Concerto in A minor.
And 5 minutes later, he dropped dead. They never met. You know, I was backstage when that happened.
Oh my God.
Sure. Look, you know, his last words to Ormandy were very, very, very strange. He said, Mr. Ormandy, this is the first time that we play together. I hope it's not going to be the last. And 2 minutes later, he was dead.
He had a cerebral hemorrhage during the first movement, collapsed, and died in Carnegie Hall that evening. So, needless to say, it was part of the unfortunate circumstances that seemed to meet Barere at every turn. And although his timing was fabulous in all matters musical, it was not so good in other areas of life. Okay, that's it.
He used to give me lessons, and I used to miss a note or what. He says, look, it's A flat, it's A flat. I said, I can't get there. He says, well, why not? I'm just over there. To him, it was simple.